Congratulations for successfully accessing the vitally important aspect of the pattern pamphlet, Trendy Tunic Tops. I've had a ball shopping, designing, writing, recording all of the how-tos to create figure-flattering and skimming tunic tops. You'll learn how to turn an existing garment into a tunic top and how to transform a top pattern into a tunic pattern. You have in your hands, or have downloaded, the tissue from my top-selling pattern, Londa's Terrific T-Knit Top. Before we get started, please understand that I'm recording this from my home, not a recording studio, and I'm lucky enough to have a retired hubby with me, so please excuse any extraneous sound effects. Let's get started. Let's take a quick look at some of the garments that I've created as I've developed this pamphlet. As I boiled it all down, I figured out there really are three different big ways that you can create a tunic out of an existing garment or an existing pattern. First of all, you can add within the pattern. You can change the shape of the pattern. You see that in the first two garments. The aqua-colored tunic top shows how we can create fullness within, but not just at the side seams, rather rotating a bust dart down into the hemline to create those nice cone-type shaped points. In the middle picture at the top, you'll see what I call wings. This is very popular and ready to wear, and as you can see with my hand, I've also figured out a way to insert a pocket. Super easy. The second way that you can create a tunic top is by adding things to the bottom. Here in this photograph, this is actually a two-piece garment. The underlayer is a tank top shape that's been elongated and a ruffle has been added at the very bottom. And then the burnout overdress just comes down to a little bit over where that ruffle attaches, so that I call it the overdress, and the tie-dye ruffle portion the underdress. Another way that you can add to the bottom of patterns or garments is with inserting godets in the side. I absolutely love this garment I made where I used men's ties to feature as the godets in this design. And then there's flounces. I have a whole pattern about flounces. But in this pattern, I'm going to show you, in addition to how to make a full circle flounce, how to do what you see in this garment where there isn't quite as much fullness. I call those modified flounces. And then the third way that you can create tunics is by taking an existing top or a simple pattern and then start draping and putting on overlays or bias pieces on top of your garment to create a total new look. Let's get started. Oh, and please understand that what you're listening and reading here is in addition to the more summarized version that you have printed in your hand or which you have downloaded. I won't repeat everything that's written. That would be kind of silly. So I may be referring back to that portion, but please use these two elements of this pamphlet in tandem, what's been printed and what you're accessing at this point. I think it's always a good idea to look where you're going before you start on the trip. So let's look at the final garment. Again, this one is made of a Ponte double knit. That was in my stash. Starting at the collar, that's what I call the Chico twist. I started with it about 9 inches wide. All of the how-tos for that great neckline can be found in my Nifty Necklines pattern. I like 3/4 length sleeves. I just am comfortable in that, so when you sew, you can make them however long you desire. But the thing to look at specifically on this garment in the front, side, and back views are that at the side fronts and the side backs, you have kind of a nice cone shape that ends in a point at the hemline. So it's a little shorter at the center front and center back, much shorter at the side seams, but then at the side fronts and side backs, you have that longer point. Let's look at some more photographs that I found here, there, and everywhere with this style. One of my favorite places to shop is the catalog or website called Soft Surroundings. Look at these two garments that I just right-clicked, saved onto my computer right from their website. The garment on the left, you can see this effect of the side front point is done just at her left leg. And then the pattern has just been cut diagonally and cut out of two different fabrics. Super simple. The one on the right appears to me to be out of a lighter weight jersey. My guess is that it's probably rayon and lycra. Look closely at the center front. It appears to me that wrong sides have been sewn together, allowing the seam allowance to be exposed on the outer side of the garment, really just as a little rolled embellishment. But if you look at it, you can see that it has the points at the side fronts of both her left and right leg, and it appears as if in the back as well. So let's look at a couple more garments. On this two-tone blue garment, there's a couple of things to look at. Again, you've got that same cone additional flowy shape, but also look at the line that's lower at the center front, higher at the sides. That's what we'll talk about in the wings section as what's just a really attractive line for your body. Now, it might not be exactly this, but it is for mine on this green tencel top that I created. But if you can establish this good design line to which you will add other parts, it'll just be worth its weight in gold to you. You will see that I have defined that on my basic pattern with a red tape. The other thing to note here is that the darker of the two values is at the bottom of the garment. Darker colors around our tummies and our tushes is always going to make us look smaller. It's not just there, however, it's also at the bottom of the sleeves and then carried out in the neckline binding. So you want to repeat a color around a garment. That makes it look good. You'll note that as we go through this, I'll be continually pointing out what I call couture camouflage points, as well as I have done that in the printed portion of this pamphlet. The following picture, this one, I believe, is one of the first ones that really caught my eye. Again, it's the same shaping. This time it's done a little bit shorter. We'll talk about your determination of the very best lengths for you. Your side seam length, your center front length, your center back length, and that distance from your shoulder at the base of your neck down to the longest point appropriate for your body. Here in this picture you can see what I started off with, my inspiration photograph, and then what I found when I took a dive into my fabric and my trim stash. That collection of yarns is something that I carry at my website. It's called Oliver Twist. These are hand-dyed yarns. There's 10 different ones within one of the packages, and I believe it's 10 meters of each one. But I have had so much fun in my creative sewing using yarns from these packets to couch down, and I'll show you how I do that at the hem of this garment. In the general directions portion of your pamphlet, you have their necessary and helpful length measurements. In that part, I have you record for your reference these lengths. Your underarm side seam length, so that's the distance from that seam line where the sleeve would attach underneath down to your finished hem. The front length, that would be from your shoulder line at the base of the neck down to your good hemline point. So in this style, you would be establishing the longest length where that point would come to. Then your center front length, which would be from the base of your neck at your center front down to where you want your hemline to be, and the same for the center back. With these measurements in hand, you can simply add to your pattern, as you can see that I've done here. For me, over here at the side seam, which is at the left in this picture, you can see that I've added 7 inches. And do you see also that I've carried through the same angle that the side seam of my original pattern was going at? I wouldn't drop it straight down and change that silhouette. I would continue it. And then you see there at the center front, I'm adding an additional 3 inches. No, that's not at the center front, that's at that side point. And then over at the center front, which would be the right side of the picture, I've added 6.5 inches. So figure out what those lengths are for you and simply add them to the pattern to begin with, as you see I've done here. All right, following along with your printed pamphlet, if you'll look there under Roman numeral 1, side front points, we're down to the second bullet point, front. Rotate the dart to the hemline. Let me give you some more explanation. This is one reason that I love to use my terrific T pattern. Of course, why would I use any other? But I'm very happy that I included a front option pattern piece that includes a dart. The reason I did that in my pattern to begin with was because after having my ears wide open to a lot of different women, it seemed as if the more endowed women just were staunch believers that they need a bust dart. Now, some very well-respected experts in the sewing field say properly drafted, you don't need a bust dart. But for designing purposes, boy, am I glad my pattern has that. Because what you do is this. You're going to rotate the fullness from that side bust dart down to the hem. This is flat pattern. This is dart rotation. So just as it says there in your directions, the first thing you want to do is to extend the dart point towards the center front about 3/4 of an inch. You see, darts as they're sewn do not get sewn right up to the point where you point your nipple. Instead, they end at the bust circle, which is roughly about 1.5 inches diameter. So extending that end of the dart 3/4 of an inch would get it to about the bust apex. All right, so you extend that. Then what you're going to do is to draw a vertical line parallel to the center front down. That's from that BP, that bust point, straight down. That's the red line you see at the right-hand side of the picture here. And then all you need to do is to slash, cut with your rotary cutter, the lower leg of the dart up to that point and then straight down. And what's going to happen is what you'll see in the next picture. Here's how it should look once you close up the dart. So you bring that lower leg that you just cut on of the dart and you bring it up to the top leg of the dart, closing up the dart. When you do that, it opens up this cone shape at the bottom. I have simply taken pink tissue paper and taped it underneath what was opened. So you have rotated the fullness from the dart down to the hemline. It's really still a dart. If you sewed this in, it would be a dart nicely fitting all of this area to your bust point. But for this fashion, this style, we want this to just be in soft fullness. Then you can see in the very center of that, at the very lower hemline edge, I have just drawn in the line for the finished hemline that I so desired. Simple. Here I am taking that pattern piece that I just created and I'm trying it on my dress form. Now I happen to be lucky enough to have a duct tape double, which is pretty much what my body is, or at least was back in 2002. At any rate, do you see that red tape down there at the very bottom of the pattern? If you could get down at that level, you would see that that is what I call my no-no length. So I have not had the bottom hem of this style end at my no-no length. This video part of the Trendy Tunic pattern pamphlet is in addition to the printed part that you either purchased or you downloaded. So for more explanation of the no-no length, please read about that under Couture Camouflage in the general directions portion. Most especially on a top like this with this very angular hem, you really have to pay attention to the specific shape of your hem allowances. I call these widgets, and this is how you do it. In the upper left-hand corner of this picture, you can see that I've simply added some extra pattern tissue to the very bottom of the side seam. The next picture on the top, what I've done is I've folded this hem allowance up into place. Then the lower picture on the left, all you do is cut right through everything on the side cutting line. Then you can see in the middle at the bottom, when you open up the hem allowance, what you have is that little triangle over there. I have put some pink tissue paper underneath it in the lower right hand picture so that you can see the triangle that you get. The one other thing that you need to do, you can see in that middle lower picture where you just trim off any excess tissue, even with your lowermost cutting line. So that's how you do it. That's how you make a widget so that when the hem is pressed up into place, the upper edge of the hem allowance fits the garment. Super simple. So here is a bird's eye view of the front pattern that you've created. You see by the pencil over there at right, my no-no length. You can see that it's longer than that. You can see my side widget at the left so that the hem will be proper when it's folded up. So you have the cone in the front. Now you need to create a similar type cone in the back. Well, you don't have a bust dart in the back, obviously, so here's how I figured out to take care of that. In the upper right-hand picture, you'll see that I have laid the front pattern piece onto the back pattern piece, matching the shoulders, and I have just there marked the height of the bust dart onto the back pattern tissue at the center back. So that's all that blue line is up there above the tip of my pen. I'm just marking the level of the dart. Then as you move over to the right picture, you can see that I drew a horizontal line from the center back all the way over to the side seam. So that's the level at which I want to create the fullness beginning for the similar shape in the back. The blue angled line then is drawn straight up and over to the double notch on the sleeve from a long vertical that I simply established by deciding, okay, where do I want this cone area to be in the back of my pattern? So you can see here that I did it 4 inches from the center back. I dropped that aqua vertical line. So I have a long vertical and then a diagonal from that bust level up to the double notch at the armhole. Now the first picture at the lower on the left side, you can see then what I have done is I slashed up that tall vertical line and then over on that diagonal aqua line to the seam line. Look at the next little picture in the middle. To the seam line. Can you see if you look real close that I have put a piece of Scotch transparent tape right there over the seam line to reinforce it, because in order to get this to open up, you also have to snip into the seam allowance. So at that notch coming in towards the seam line, I have snipped, leaving a little hinge of tissue, which is a little more secure now because I had tape there. I've cut through the tape, but I've left a little hinge of tissue. So that allows the dart to open up through the body of the pattern, and it rotates closed there in the seam allowance. That just is the way that flat pattern manipulation works. Try it. It will make sense. It's so easy and so much fun. Now that I've got that interior cone shape on the back, I just need to copy the angles and so forth from the front pattern tissue to the back. And that's all you see that I'm doing here, is just copying that front hemline silhouette to the back pattern. Pattern design involves a lot of testing. I have not been to Fashion Institute of Technology. I have my degree in home economics from long, long ago from the University of Illinois, but most of what I have developed has been self-taught. I'm the first one to admit that. So I have to do a lot of testing. And as I worked out this rotation of the bust dart to the hem, I thought, I wonder how much the grain line of a woven fabric would emphasize this or not emphasize this, and is this right? So I did quite a few tests, and this one I hope shows it to you as much as it does to me. But here's my inspiration photograph pinned onto one of my woven tests. Just look at the left side of this garment as you're looking at it. That side front I had actually cut with this cone in it. But for the right front, as you're looking at it, the right side, I had not cut it with the cone shape in it. I had just added it at the side seam. And to my eye and to my hands, and from my looking at it with the grain line actually affecting it and everything, I really felt like rotation of the dart to the hemline, as you see there at the left, really created a nicer cone shape than just putting it out at the side accomplished. So I have tested it. I know that it works. It works both in a woven fabric and in a knit. This pamphlet is really all about knits, since that's what we generally wear these days. But I did want to share that with you. Now that you have your pattern made, you'll need to figure out how much yardage you'll need. This is obviously not the fabric from which I cut these pattern pieces, but it was good to show you here the fabric layout to create this garment. Again, if you'll go back to the pamphlet itself, in general directions, fabric requirements, and layout, you'll just have to understand here how you figure out your yardage. It generally does not make sense to keep your fabric folded in half lengthwise, so with the selve edges together. Rather do as you see that I've done here by creating a new fold wide enough to encompass the widest width of the front and the back. So that's what you see down the left-hand side. You've got the front pattern tissue at the top and the back pattern tissue at the bottom, both set on the fold. Then can you see that I have enough fabric of that 58 to 60 inch width of the knit left over to accommodate the sleeve? I'll simply need to cut out the sleeve twice, and remember, you need a left sleeve and a right sleeve. So if you cut out one with the printing of the tissue paper up, then remember to turn the pattern with the printed side down so that you cut the other sleeve when you cut the second one. How many of us have cut the same sleeve twice? Since this pattern pamphlet is about how you create tunic lengths, it is not, let me emphasize, complete step by step for every garment that you see. Instead, you will find that in my complete pattern booklet with the terrific T-top, with the cowls, with the flounces, with the shearing. In those pattern booklets, I walk you step by step through an entire garment and many garments with each pattern. So on this pattern pamphlet, I'm not doing that for all of the garments I made, but rather I'm doing so in more completion just on a couple. And this aqua first garment is one that I really wanted to include more construction tips on, especially as they were different and not repeated in any of my other products. What you see me doing here is taking the selvage of this Ponte double knit that you can see I've cut about 5/8 of an inch wide, and I am simply treating it as piping. I am inserting it down the center back seam of this garment. So when I cut out the back, I just allowed for a seam allowance instead of cutting it on the fold. And here you can see that I am stitching it down to one side. Then this will be sandwiched. Then I'll lay the other back on top and stitch it. And we'll see in the next picture what it ended up looking like. So here's what it looks like. This is the little added furry detail down the center back of my garment. I also made a periwinkle jacket out of a Ponte double knit and did this same treatment on some seams on it, and I just really loved it. I really shared in length about that in one of my blog posts from spring of 2017, so you might want to check that out. Let's talk about the hem of this garment. This became very obvious to me in my regular woven fabric test. When you have a shaped hemline like this, the ramifications of what happens with the hem allowance, in addition to all of that widget stuff, you've got points to miter and you've got the center front and center back. What you're looking at here is either the center front or the center back. It doesn't matter. Now, out of a knit, it can be steamed and pressed so that it fits. But can you see that the hem allowance really is having to kind of stretch to fit? I knew all along that I would be top stitching this hemline and then couching the yarns on top, so I was pretty certain that it would work. I did a test first, but just understand the basic premise that when you have shape to your hemlines, unless you're just making it a cut edge, which is certainly perfectly fine to do. I know it goes against the grain of some of us older sewers, but it's all over there and expensive, ready to wear, and knits don't ravel, so you can do it. If you're going to actually hem a garment, you need to understand some of the mechanics, some of the engineering that's going on. So let's talk about how you handle creating a mitered point at the hemline of this garment. Here you can see the inside of one of those points. I have not at this point yet interfaced my hem allowance, as I really recommend doing, but I have pressed up the 1-inch hem on both angles of this point, so you can see the pressed lines I have at this time. Then you unfold what you just pressed in and you take the point and you pull it straight up. When you do so, look at the right side there. The pressed line from your first press should align with that pressed line, so underneath my finger furthest to the right there. And then when that hem allowance gets pressed back up on both sides of this point, you'll get what we see in the next photograph. This is what a mitered corner looks like then once you fold those hem allowances up from both sides of the point. It looks mitered really nice, just like this. So play with it following these directions and you will smile. This is the little kind of thing that we sewers get excited about. Now I'm going back and I'm going to be adding cross grain cut strips of lightweight fusible interfacing to the hem allowance. I do this on all of my knit garments that have hems. This gives support to the hem. It avoids ripply hems. It lets me use the twin needle or the cover hem, and it just looks really, really good. It holds its shape, and it's just what I've worked out over the years is the smart thing to do. For more tips and exact how-tos on that, I highly recommend my 3-disc DVD, Stretching Your Knit Sewing Know-How. All I've done here is to interface the entire hem allowance. I have clipped at the hem line so that I can balance the bulk here at the side seam. I always do that, and I teach that completely in my 3-disc DVD, Stretching Your Knit Sewing Know-How. You see, if you turned this hem allowance up without throwing the seam allowance and the hem the opposite direction, you would have 2 layers on the right side and 6 layers on the left side. Not good. So if you clip it and throw the seam allowance the opposite direction, now when it flips up, you will have 3 layers of fabric and 3 layers of fabric, no big bump. Your hem stitching will look much, much nicer. It's just a good practice to do. Your garments will look much more professional if you do this. And finally, what I call the icing on the cake is to add a little bit of pizzazz, a little bit of, oh, she wouldn't find that in ready to wear. What did she do on those hemlines? What I've done here is I've simply taken 3 strands from that Oliver Twist hand-dried yarn hank, and I'm twisting them together as I am couching them down right along the stitching where I stitched up the hemline. Do you see, if you look at the lower right there, that I have stitched it up? Now I have put monofilament thread, probably the clear, in my needle. I have lowered the upper tension. I have my regular polyester thread in the bobbin, and I have set it on a zigzag stitch of 3 long and no wider than is necessary to go on either side, swing from the left, swing to the right, to encompass the width of this twisted yarn trim. That's all there is to it. I leave about 7 inches when I start, about 7 inches when I end. Then I thread them on a big darning needle. I love the chibi needles from Clover, and I stick that needle down in between the layers, poke it out, clip close. I feel that if you tie a knot in yarns like this, even on the inside of a garment, sooner or later they will come undone, and I'm not a fan of glue, so I bury my yarns as I just described. And that's it for this garment. Now we're going to move on to what I call wings. Again, we're adding it within the garment shape itself as we're cutting the garment out, and they're just extensions of width that then when gravity takes effect, they fall straight down into pretty folds. Very frequently we've seen this in ready to wear, and as I'll show you in just a minute, it's all over our patterns as well. But once you see how it's done, you too will realize you really don't need to invest in an additional pattern just to get this shaping. Here are the garments, or some of them, that I made in testing. The floral print, there at the upper left, where you can see I have my hand in the pocket, that was my very first, and I would say it's not real. It's not a really big wing, but just enough to give some soft fullness, and I elected to put it on just my left side seam. And then the garment at the right, the green one, is really a remake of a top and a skirt. Well, I wasn't wearing the skirt, so how about making it into a tunic? So let me show you how I did these both. Undoubtedly, you don't need to be convinced of how popular this look is, but it's all over Pinterest as well, and these are just a few of the pins that I put on my board. Look with me at the one on the left. Do you see this is a large triangular shaped side wing? Mine is rectangular, but you can make them a triangle shape as well. It doesn't really matter. And then the one on the right is a rectangle, but it doesn't go straight out from the side seam, it slants down. Just different versions of the same idea. Here are even some more pictures from my files. The one at the upper left-hand corner was a beach cover-up. I snapped that picture on a vacation. Now that is a really long side wing. My recollection is that that was almost 36 inches long, so it really draped down to cover the leg. Then moving on to the middle, you can see here these really just look like additions to the side seams at an angle and longer at the hemline to create that blue dress shape. Over there at the upper right, that was such an interesting garment that I saw, and I want to try to make this. And there was a pocket in there as well, which is what gave me the idea for adding the pocket. But this was in New Orleans, and this was a dress. So if you go straight down from her hand, the wing shapes had actually been stitched together there down until it got through being the wing and became the hem of the garment. So I thought that made just a pretty cool looking sacky type dress. Then the lower left-hand corner, here you see very exaggerated side wings, longer than even the sleeve. A lot of times they're actually giving us the schematics for how you do this in the pins on Pinterest. Frequently those come from foreign countries. And then at the lower right, yet one more schematic pattern plan. If you can switch over to metrics, all of this is given to you right there. So it's just fun to play pattern designer, and I hope I'm giving you the confidence to do more of that yourself. And last but not least, you have the line art drawings on the patterns, and you can shop patterns for any of the big pattern companies today right from your own computer. You just go to that company's website, you click on the different patterns, and then generally you have to go down to line art, and you can see these lined diagrams. The top one is from a pattern of Connie Crawford's, so you can see how it's extended there. That's really what I'm just calling a wing. The bottom one is from an older Vogue pattern from Marcy Tilton. Again, it's just this big, long rectangle, sometimes triangle, sometimes a blend of the two, extended out from the side seam of the pattern. Simple. You can do this. Here's what my pattern looked like to create that floral top tunic. I actually just really curved in the side seam. That's that red drafting tape line with a post note there that says a very curved side seam. And then it goes out kind of at a curve there, that lower aqua line, and it extended 9 inches out from the side seam. It was an additional 8.5 inches long to my original Londa's Terrific Tee pattern, and this wing actually started curving out at about 6 inches down from the underarm. So that's it. Super simple. Now that you have tissue paper, scotch tape, and something to measure with, you are armed and ready to create all kinds of side winged patterns. But if you're going to do it on just one side, and you certainly could do it on both sides, there's a lot out there in ready to wear with wings on both sides. But if you're going to do it on one side, you also have to think and then think again. Put that thinking hat on and look with me at my pattern pieces. Take the front piece that you see at the lower left and just visually flip it and put it on your body. Think of the floor there as the right side of the fabric. So this is the front and the wing is on the right? So if I cut out the front this way with the printed side up on the pattern, that wing will be on the right side seam. Therefore, I have made a separate back pattern, and again, if I have the printed side up of this pattern, do you see that the wing goes out to the right? So I would lay this pattern piece down on the printed right side, pretty side of the fabric in order to make sure that I had both wings on, in this case, the right side. So just keep your thinking hat on. You're growing brain cells. You're keeping from getting old. It's a good thing. Once you have your pattern pieces made, and you can see here that to keep things straight in my brain, I made a full pattern piece for the front and a full pattern piece for the back instead of just half. It was really the only way I could make sure that I got the wing on the correct side. That being said, you can see my fabric, my pattern layout here. So you can see that you have a full front and a full back, both placed with the down with the pretty side of the fabric up. And then can you see the sleeve will fit along the side of each piece? So I really only need double my length. Let me tell you that I took this photograph kind of at an angle, so that's why the front at the top looks shorter than the back. It really is not. Then it's super simple. If you want to add a pocket, if you're a pocket person, then add a pocket in that horizontal portion of your wing. And it wouldn't matter if your wing was coming straight out as mine did, or if it's down at more of an angle or a triangle. You just have to be careful as you make your pattern piece for your pocket that the lowest hanging part of it, which would be that curve at the left here, does not hang beyond where the finished hemline is going to be. I will have a very skinny little hem there at the depth of the fusible interfacing that I've put down that edge. So you just don't want your pocket hanging down beyond your drape. That's the only thing you have to remember. Then you would just insert this as you would a pocket in any side seam of any skirt or pant that you've ever made. Same thing. If you don't want to just draft that pattern shape, get out one of those old patterns and copy the pocket. The hemming of one of these winged type garments is really quite simple. There's just one thing technically that I would want to remind you of, and that is that in sewing we always want to finish horizontal edges before we finish vertical edges. So applying that to this situation, it would say that you need to hem the garment, the lowermost edge of the garment first, and then do that hem in that the vertical edges of the wing. So I pasted that little picture of where we were putting the pocket on. The leftmost vertical edge there is what is actually the hem of the wing. Now, technically, you could even sew the front to the back together there at the edge of that wing, and it would hang a little bit narrower, a little bit differently. The other thing that became obvious to me as I used this printed knit jersey was that the wrong side of your fabric that looks more white is definitely probably going to show with this winged style. So I would, having made this garment, likely restrict myself to solid fabrics or fabrics that had an interesting back as well as a front for this style. One of my new favorite garments, and it was a remake, as you'll see in the next frame, from a top and a skirt that I wasn't wearing. What you can really see on my body here is that seam, that angled seam from my underarm to my center front, and it's similar in the back. That is the line that I determined for myself is a good attach here line. And as I shared with you in the printed part of this pattern pamphlet under general directions, I highly recommend that you find a spot like this on your pattern and very clearly mark it. Then you won't have to be deciding it over and over again. In the photograph there at the right, you can see how I have it extended, showing you the extra width that then falls down straight at my center front. So here is a top that I was wearing not a whole lot of because it just seemed pretty tight around my tummy, and a skirt that, though I loved it, I just don't wear skirts that often anymore. So it became fodder for recreating. And I love to take things in my wardrobe that are not getting used and do something else with them to become a new garment that I love, and that's what happened with this. So you see here the picture on my studio floor with the sun shining in to my sunroom sewing studio, the picture of that front and the skirt. Since the front was sheared in the front, I had a lot of extra length, so that was a good thing. The skirt you can't tell, but it really, it's the fajita skirt from Lila Messenger, and I really like that pattern, but at least it gave me some interesting shapes and enough fabric to do what I wanted to with it. If you look there at the bottom picture, along the sides, those were the side seams, and then the upper seam and then folded down into that middle drape there was the very angled seam that was on that skirt. So I just carefully tore it apart and looked to see what I had and thought creatively, how can I make use of this? Here's what I was speaking of in that first frame about this green tencel remake. Do you see my red good add-on here location line? I really feel, and I can just say unequivocally, I know that a strong line on your garment, lower at the center front and center back, and shorter at the sides, even if it's just like 1.5 inches, which it is here, is going to be a flattering line on you. It really is. It's going to make your hips look smaller. It's going to make you just look taller. You're making your eyes go up and out to the sides. This is true. I had these pattern pieces handy from a taping I just did for It's So Easy on what I call the cascade hemline. The principle is the same. If you simply took this shape and the furthermost to the right vertical line there on that pink part, if you simply cut that on the fold or made it a center front seam, if you have more width than length of garment to sew it into, the excess width has no choice but to fall down at the center front, like you see there with my hand. The specifics of how you do this on a jacket front can be found in my Twin Set Tweaks pattern. And in this picture, you can actually see not only the shape in that center front seam, but you can also see the weird grain. On knit fabrics especially, which is generally what we're working with anymore, My determination is that the grain on which pattern pieces are cut really doesn't make that much difference. So as you are doing restyling, upcycling, just don't get all hung up on what the grain is, because extra width is just going to fall and it will most likely work. It's at least worth a try. So have fun.